like to do now is look at the passage that deals with Sodom and Gomorrah, and look at it with the Rashi, with the Talmudic text, and also, if we have time, with the Hasidic commentary. Now, there's really there are three primary parts to this narrative. It's actually interesting because the text does not take a break in this story. There's no natural break in the Torah. That generally speaking, in the Torah, the breaks are paragraph breaks, stuma and psuchas, like either to the end of the line or the next line. But before Sodom, it goes straight into it from the first part of the story. So it's connected. There are three parts, there are three narratives to the Sodom story. There's the narrative of God's conversation with Abraham. And then there's the narrative, which we've been doing in the afternoon with the Rashi, the narrative of of the angels saving Lot and the attack on Lot in the city of Sodom. And then there's the third part, which is the seduction of Lot by his daughters and the birth of Ammon and Moab, and which is actually the birth of the Messiah. So this story is, you could either read the story about the destruction of Sodom, or you could read this as a continuation of the birth of Isaac, because now we're getting also the birth of the Messiah, because Ruth comes from Moab and David comes from Ruth. So this is the birth of the Messiah in this story. So that's important point to the context of the story. And maybe the story is here not so much because it's about the destruction of Sodom, but because it's about the birth of the Messiah. So let's start with chapter 18, verse 16. It says, "Vayakumu misham anashim," and the men rose up from there. Which men are rising up from here? And these are the men. These are the three men who visited Abraham and gave him the news. Remember, we said who these three men were. Michael, who said that Sarah was going to get pregnant. Raphael, who healed Abraham. And Gabriel, who was here now to destroy Sodom. So the men got up from there, Vayashkifu al Panei Sodom, and they gazed towards Sodom. And Abraham walked with them to send them out. Rashi says the word Vayashkifu has a connotation of as a negative connotation. It means to say, Rashi says, Ko hashkafa, any gazing in the Bible is l'ra'ah, except for the one time it appears in a positive way is Deuteronomy 26:15, hashkifa mim'on kadshecha. Gaze down from your holy abode. So that's the only time. And Abraham was here, he walked them out to send them forth. From here we learn a very important halacha. The halacha is that you must walk your people are at your door, you have to walk them to the door. Jeff told me yesterday that Rabbi Steinsaltz walked him to the door. So this is the source of the idea that is a mitzvah from the Torah that you have to escort your guests. How far do you have to escort them? Some say you have to escort them outside the city, but there's a mitzvah from the Torah that we see from here, this source, that you have to escort them. You were trying to say something, Jeff?
I was going to say, when I told Rabbi Steinfeld he had to go down an elevator and walk down a hall, and he said, well, in the Talmud, a rabbi is supposed to have a job, so I'm a doorkeeper. That's what he said.
Well, Rabbi Steinfeld was a man of tremendous humility, so he was being humble, obviously, but this is a mitzvah that it's upon us. So even if you can't walk the person all the way home, you should try to at least walk them to the street. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to escort them. So now the verse says, "V'Hashem Amar," and God said, "Hamechaseh ani me Avraham asher ani oseh." Should I cover up from Abraham that which I am going to do? Rashi says, what does it mean, shall I cover up? This is a rhetorical question. Hamechaseh b'tmiyah. Asher Anio said, that which I'm doing to stone. This is how Rashi says it. This is the way God's speaking. Lo yafeh, lo yafeh li. It is unbecoming of me to do this thing. Shalom midaita, without God's knowledge. Ani nasati lo es haaretz hazot. I gave him this land, and I gave him these 5 cities, which I'm about to destroy. They're his. As it states, God just promised Abraham, and now he's going to destroy it. What kind of way is that to treat Abraham? I called him Abraham, which is Av Hamon Goyim, the father amongst the nations, and now I'm going to destroy his children. And I'm not going to inform somebody who loves me, meaning to say God feels a responsibility to include Abraham, because Abraham is in a partnership with God, so to speak. And then the next verse teaches us also a very important halacha that we've already seen one today, that you have to escort your guests to the door. The next verse says, Va'avram hayoyi el goy gadol. God says, I have to tell Abraham, because he's going to be a great nation. And all the nations of the world will be blessed through him. But what's the connection between God telling Abraham and the fact that he's going to be a great nation? So the Gemara actually says that there's no connection. So if that's the case, why does it mention Abraham is going to be a great nation? Listen to what the Gemara says. Amrle Ravina lahume Rabbanan. So Ravina, who was the last generation of the sages in the Talmud, says, Minah Milsa, Amar Rabbanan, Zecher Tzadik Uvracha. He says, where do I know this idea that when you mention a tzaddik's name, you have to bless it? You have to bless it. What's the source for this idea? So the source of this idea is it says, God says, should I cover up from Abraham? And right after that, it says, Abraham will become a great nation. So we see from here this concept that whenever you mention a tzaddik, you have to say, Zecher tzaddik levracha, you have to say something great about the tzaddik. This is the source of this idea, comes from Abraham. So right now, within this passage, we've seen two laws. Oh, wait, let me stop for a second. Since we're talking about laws, and let me just ask everybody, so every time we mention a tzaddik, we have to praise him. And so therefore, since they mentioned Abraham, it blessed him. So that's the next halacha. And says, Ki dativ, the pasuk says, chapter 18, verse 19, Ki dativ, l'man asher yitzaveh et banav et beito acharav, v'shamru derech Hashem ha'asot tzedakah u'mishpat, l'man avi Hashem Avraham asher diber alav. So God says, why do I want to tell him? The reason why I want to tell him is because ki yedativ, which technically speaking means for I have known, but Rashi says that's not what it means here. Rashi says what it means here is lashon chiba. This expression of known is almost like to know in an intimate manner, like modali isha, like Boaz was married, or to know means like to be in line to marry them. Boaz is our intimate, by the Hashem. And it says like Pharaoh lo yada. Pharaoh did not know. So it means he doesn't know in an intimate sense. And somebody, meaning to say, one who cherishes a person draws him close. And so therefore, why do I cherish? And now the rest of the verse is read, because I know him, meaning I love Abraham. Why? Why do I love Abraham? Because he commands his sons and his household after him. Because he teaches his children. He teaches them what to do. Why do I love Abraham? Because he teaches his children to do charity and justice. And in order that they Hashem might bring upon Avram that which he spoken. So what does it mean? I need to tell Abraham because I love him, because he teaches his children about the commandments, and in order that I might bring upon to Avram that which I have commanded. Meaning to say that Avram teaches his children, you have to do righteousness, tzedakah, and mishpat, so that Hashem can fulfill the promise that he has made to me to keep us into a great nation. Now, it doesn't say, Rashi points out, just before we go to the text of the Talmud and before we take Sheldon's question, Rashi points out that it does not say that I will bring upon the house of Abraham, but rather I will bring upon Avram. So we learn from here as follows. Rashi says, Lamanu ko mamid ben tzaddik ki'ilu eino meis. We learn from here that anyone who supports the son of a righteous tzaddik, it's as though this person has not died. Meaning to say that if he keeps Abraham's children acting in the proper way, it's as though Abraham if Avram's children keep the commandments, it's as though Avram himself were still alive. That is what Rashi says here. Let me just pause for a second. The Gemara, since we say that what makes Abraham, why is God saying this to Abraham? Because Abraham is someone who takes upon himself to teach tzedakah mishpat. What do we say about this? The Gemara in Yevamos 79a tells us that there are three ways you know if somebody is from the Jewish nation. Shlosha simanim b'umas Yisrael. Rachmanim, baishanim, v'gomrei chasadim. If they're merciful, if they're humble, and if they do acts of kindness. Now, how do we know if they do acts of kindness? Gomrei chasadim, because it says, ki yedativ, man asher yitzaves banav ves beito acharav, so that he will teach his children and his household after him to do tzedakah and mishpat. Man asher yitzaves banav ves beito acharav v'shamu derech Hashem v'asu tzedakah mishpat. So we see from here that there are three ways we know somebody's from the Jewish people. If they are merciful, humble, and they do acts of kindness. I also want to say, I'll tell everybody a story. This was told to me by the mayor of a very Jewish town. I'm not going to say which town, but very Jewish. He told a story to me last week. He said that a few years ago, he was trying to put together a slate of council members for the city. The city had a diverse religious group who were members. One was Jewish, one was Muslim, and one was Christian. So he went to the rabbi of the biggest rabbi of the synagogue in town, and he said, there's a person who's running, he's a Muslim, do you have a problem with it? He says, no, I have no problem. I look at the person. If the person's a good person, we're going to support him. So he said, okay. So he introduced the rabbi to the Muslim, and the rabbi was very appreciative, and he said, yeah, seems like a good guy. I can endorse, but I'm not against you. And so he said, okay, I'm going to stand outside the synagogue when people are coming there on Sunday morning to the minyan, and I just need to get 500 names to get him on the ballot. So he said, okay. So then he's getting all the people are walking, and the guy's a little bit nervous, the mayor, because he knows, like Jews, it's on edge. One of them could just start screaming at them, the Muslim. Like there's not everybody's as ecumenical as this as the mayor was. So anyway, people are signing. Then one guy comes up to sign, and he actually happened to be a rabbi, not the rabbi of the synagogue, but he was a person who was ordained rabbi, but he was just going to synagogue services that morning to daven. So he's looking at the names, and he's hesitating to sign, and the mayor was very nervous. He's like, "Okay, please, just don't make a scene. If you don't want to sign it, just go in. Just be quiet. Just please don't embarrass me in front of this nice friend of mine who's running for office who is Muslim." The rabbi says, "This guy says, listen, I'll sign the Christian." I'll sign for the Muslim, but the Jew, he talks during services. I'm not signing for him. And that was anyway. That's what you can recognize the Jews. The Jews are humble, merciful, and acts of kindness. And I put that in there. They're also a little bit of a nudnik sometimes. Anyway, okay. The next Gemara I wanted to say is that there's another reference to this. What does it mean that the Gemara says, Darish Rabbi Simoy, Maider Siv, excuse me, that what does it mean? Achenu gomle chasadim b'nei gomle chasadim. He says, our brothers are people who do kindness, who are the children of people who do kindness. These are people who hold on to the covenant of Abraham. And that's learned out from this verse. That's learned out from this verse. What does tzedakah mean? What does tzedakah mean here? Tzedakah means that you act beyond the letter of the law, with name Mishur Sadin. Meaning to say, it says, righteousness you shall pursue. Why does it say it twice? Tzedek, tzedek, tiradov. Means to say, you regular righteousness, everybody has to do. But the Jew is supposed to go beyond it. So that means to say exceptional righteousness. Exceptional. And exceptional righteousness is what we're supposed to do. Okay, so now we go up to the next verse. The next verse tells us, Vayomer Hashem Za'akat Sodom v'Amorah ki Rabba. The cries of Sodom and Amorah are come out to me because they are great. V'chatatam, and their sins, ki kavda ma'od, because they are very heavy. The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us, what does that mean? Ki Rabba, because they are great. So the Gemara says that this refers to a Rabisa, which the Gemara understands as to be a young woman. And say it refers to a Rabisa. Have hasamahi Rabisa. There was a young woman who cried out. Have mafkas rifta aniya bechatzva. And she was giving bread. She was giving out bread to the poor. There was a woman. This is why Sodom was destroyed, because there was a woman there in Sodom who was giving out the bread. Hold on one second. And what did she do? Iglai Milsa, the matter became revealed. Shafua beduvsha. They took this young girl and they spread honey all over her body. Vukmua al igar shura. And they stuck her on Ugar Shura. That they stuck her on the rooftop, on the wall, on a rooftop, so everybody will see. So basically, they displayed her for the whole world to see. And therefore it states, that the cries of Sodom and Gomorrah have come out to me because they are great. Al iske riba, on this manner relating to this young woman. And I mentioned this in when we studied Rashi the other day. I mentioned this, that Ben Yehuda, the genius who recreated the Hebrew language, they say that he misunderstood this Talmudic text, because a lot of the esoteric words in Hebrew come from the Gemara. Ben Yehuda was a genius, but here the Hebrew word for jam, for jelly, for jam is riba, because they took this young woman and they spread her with honey. So honey is like jam. So he calls her riba. But really, the Gemara understands riba to be not jam, but a young woman. And so, anyway, I don't know if you knew that, Aya. So that's one of the that's one of the mistakes Ben Yehuda made. Obviously, we did so many beautiful things, so we're not going to hold him accountable. But why does he have to take this word? Why does the Gemara take this word out of the literal context? The literal context is that there were cries because there were so many terrible things wrong. Why does the Gemara have to come up with this ukimta, this crazy case of a young girl who was feeding guests, and as a consequence, she was tortured in this manner? Because generally speaking, throughout the Torah, the word zakah comes on people who are oppressed, and we don't hear anything, and so therefore, why are we saying zakah? And so therefore, they have to say that there was a person who was being oppressed, and so therefore, that's why they wrote zakat, meaning to say the cries of this person. Yeah, Jeff, you had a question. So the next verse that I want to talk about on this on the next Talmudic text, it says, by the stone, it says zakat Sodom v'Amorah ki rabbah. It says the cries of Sodom and Gomorrah because they are great. And by the generation and the flood, it also says the same word, Vayera ki rabbat ra'at adam. And it's the same language. And this is to teach us that the two actions were the same. And what were they being punished for? So they were being punished for this. We know that this generation of the flood was punished for the sin of theft. The reason why I mention this is that in the non-Jewish world, it's assumed that Sodom was destroyed because of the sin of homosexuality. But that's not the rabbinic interpretation. The rabbis don't say that this is the sin, that was the deciding factor. In fact, the rabbis associate it with lack of generosity, a lack of charity, a lack of hospitality. And here they're associating it with theft. But the rabbis never talk about the sin of the prohibition of homosexuality. And so that just shows you that was the Christian exegesis, but not the rabbinic exegesis. Okay, so then it says in the next psukim, there's not too many Talmudic texts on it, so I'll just read it very quickly. He says, God says, I'll go down and I'll see, and if they acted in accordance with its which came to me, and then I'll destroy them. If not, I will know. Vayifnu misham anashim. So the men from there went, right? Vayelchu Sodoma, and they were standing there in front of Sodom. Va'avram odenu omed lifnei Hashem. And Avram was still standing before God. Vayigash Avraham vayomar. Abraham comes close and he says, Ha'af tispet tzadikim rasha. Will you also kill the tzaddik, the righteous one, with the wicked one? Maybe there are 50 righteous people. Maybe there are 50 righteous people in this city. It's sacrilegious for you to do this, to kill the tzaddik with the wicked one. God forbid, the one who's the judge of the earth, not acting properly, he's going to kill the whole city, even when there are 50 righteous people. Verse 26, Vayomer Hashem, God says, Imem tzabistom chamishim tzadikim mitoch ha'ir v'nasati l'kol makom baburam. If I find 50 righteous people in the city, I will save the whole city on their behalf. Vayan Avram Vayomar. And Abraham responds and he says, and this is the pasuk I want to cite the Talmudic text from. Abraham answered and he said, Hinena alti udaber el Adonai v'anochi afar va'ifar. He says, I've just started to speak to God, but I am but dust and ashes. So what does he mean by this phrase, but I am but just dust and ashes? So here, there's a lot of Talmudic text on it. First of all, we'll start with the Rashi. Rashi says, quoting the Midrash and Bereshis Rabbah, Abraham says, I really was destined to become dust through the king, meaning to say, I shouldn't have survived. Who am I to have survived? I attacked those 4 kings. I should have been killed once, and Aphar. And I was stuck in the fiery furnace of Nimrod, and he was going to burn me to death. But you saved me. Asher I'm doing. So it was your mercy which stood on my behalf. So Abraham remembers, and this is one of the greatest lessons that we should have in our own lives. Abraham, at this moment where he should be judging the people of Sodom who are worthy to get it, Abraham remembers with gratitude that he wouldn't be where he is at this moment were not for the fact that God saved him twice. First from the kings, or actually first from Nimrod, but it's Aphar from the kings. He would have been killed in that battle, and Aphar from the furnace when he was thrown in. So that's the first, that's what Rashi says. But now we have other Midrashic texts. Midrash says as follows. Midrash connects this to the other time that Aphar appears in the Torah. And where is that? There are other times where there's Aphar in the Torah. Anybody know which other commandments have dust and ashes in them? Anybody know? Two very, very important narratives in the text are two very important ones. Yes?
Paraduma.
Excellent, excellent. The red heifer. And what's the other one? Okay, the other one is, all right, I'll say it. Yeah, Shelton, what is the other one?
Surah.
Exactly, the Sota. So this is very good. We have a community of scholars here, and we appreciate it. I'm humbled that you take the time to study with us. Thank you. So Darash Rabba says from the Gemara in Sota 17a, B'schar sha'amar Avram v'anochi afar va'efer. In the merit that Abraham said, I am but dust and ashes, Zachu banav l'shtei mitzvot. His children merited 2 commandments, 2 mitzvot. The Aphar of the para, the ashes of the red heifer, the Afar Sota, and the dust of the Sota woman. The red heifer is the cow that is burnt, and its ashes are sprinkled on a person who is ritually impure. And the dust of the Sota is the earth is gathered up from the floor of the temple, and it is mixed with water, and it is drunk by the woman who's accused of being adulterous. So the Gemara then asks, well, there's a third possibility. What's the third possibility? What about the covering up over the blood? There's a mitzvah to cover up the blood. What does that mean? After you kill a bird, you're supposed to take some earth and cover up the blood. So the Gemara says that's not actually a mitzvah, that's just preparation of the mitzvah. Meaning to say, because without covering up the blood, you would still be allowed to eat the meat. But I'll just say, by the way, I still remember when I was in rabbinical school, mitzvah of covering up the blood of a bird is not a mitzvah we typically do, but I was studying with Rabbi Michal Katz, he was Rosh Yeshiva, I was in his shir, and he brought in a chicken, and we had a shochet, and then right there in the middle of the classroom, he poured the earth over the blood, and he said, this is the mitzvah, and he said the bracha of Kisoy Adam. It was a beautiful experience, actually. Looking back, I still remember it. Said a bracha then, one bracha, and we remember it 30 years later. But the idea is, what's the concept here? Why does the Gemara relate this scene with Avram to the mitzvah of the paraduma and the mitzvah of the sota? So first of all, the sota is a little easier to understand. The sota is this idea that this woman is accused of not being honest, of being adulterous. And so she's accused of this adultery. And we give her an opportunity to clear her name. We're not just going to rush to judgment. and to throw her to the gallows. And this comes in the merit of Avram, because Avram was even trying to preserve the people, to save the people of Sodom. So just like Avram went the extra mile to save the people of Sodom, his descendant, his daughter, we go the extra mile to try and save her. We try and come up with this ordeal that will hopefully save her life. And what about the ashes of the red heifer? The ashes of the red heifer, that's a process whereby a person has become distant from God. If they have the red heifer's ashes on them, they're sprinkled upon them, they become pure and they can return to God. So this is also in the merit of Avram, because Avram was trying to bring back the people of Sodom. The people of Sodom were distant, and Avram was trying to bring them back. That's in the merit. In that merit, his children have a path back, and that's through the ashes of the red heifer. So that's the way I read that text from the Gemara in Sota. Furthermore, the Gemara in Sota says that if a person who's accused of being this adulterous woman, if she's meritorious, she's going to merit to have a descendant. It says, Zochta yotze mimena ben ka'Avram Avinu. If she merits, she'll have an offspring just like Abraham. Just like Abraham. So the Gemara directly connects it. Okay. One more idea about the dust and the ashes is that the dust and the ashes, which Abraham says at this point, this is a symbol of his humility. God has just told Abraham, you are going to become a great nation. You're going to be the father of all the nations in the world. Abraham doesn't come to God with arrogance and say, listen, God, you just told me I'm great. Abraham comes to God with tremendous humility. He says, even though he was just appointed to greatness, he says, who am I? I'm nobody. I'm flesh and blood. And the Gemara in Chulin notes this, that God says, Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu Yisrael, Choshkani Bachem. I have a cheshek for you. I have a strong love for you. Because even in the moment that I bring greatness upon you, you humble yourself before me. I gave greatness to Abraham, and Abraham responds by saying, I am but dust and ashes. This is the Gemara in Chulin 89a. And so to Moshe and Aaron, they say, V'nachnu ma, what are we? And David said, Vanochi torat v'lo ish. David says, I am a worm and not a man. So if you want to know the way a person should act, the person should act like Abraham. We already saw the three attributes, Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Gdolei Chasadim. Now we see a fourth, that he acts with tremendous humility, even after being appointed to a position of greatness. Also, the Mishnah in Tainus tells us that ashes are essentially an essential part of the repentance process. It says, if you are waiting to repent, if it has not rained, you're supposed to take the ark out to the street of the city, and you place the Ephar Mikla, you place the ashes on the ark and on the head of the Nasi, on the head of the president, on the head of the court. And why? Why are you putting the ashes on their heads? To remember the merit of Abraham, who said, Anochi afar va'efer. So why is the merit of Abraham being called at this moment, according to the Gemara in Tainus, the Yerushalmi, chapter 2? To say as follows. Is to say that Abraham, who was so humble, we have his merit. The Rambam has a different text here. Rambam actually says that you're supposed to put the ashes also on the Torah scroll itself. That was in his text. That's very controversial, Rambam. Anyway, so the story continues. We're not going to read all the verses, but Abraham is unable to convince God because he can't find the 10 righteous people. And it says in verse 33, Vayera Hashem kasher kilo daber. When Abraham finishes speaking, God left. Kasher kilo daber Avram. Avram shavlim kamo. And Avram returned to his place. We learn from here another halacha. This comes from Meseches Derech Eretz. And this halacha is that a person is not supposed to leave his friend or his teacher unless he first asks permission from them. You're not supposed to leave your friend or your teacher unless you first ask permission. Where do we see this? Because it says, Hashem kasher kilo Abraham. As though the Talmud is saying, it's as though he's saying to him, permission, can I depart from you? So this is another halacha we learn from, this time not from Abraham, but from God, that God, so to speak, is asking permission to depart. And we ourselves, whenever we're leaving a house or a friend or a teacher, we should always ask permission to depart. This is another way to behave from Abraham, another humility. We see Abraham is expressing himself, even though Abraham was the founder, the general, just told he's going to be a great nation. Right away, he's humbling himself to save the people of Sodom. And if Abraham could humble himself, how much more so should we be humble? How much more so should we express our gratitude to God and try to help people through tzedakah and mishpah like Avram Avinu was doing? So let me stop here. If anybody has any questions, of course, I'd be happy to address them.